Hey, what's up everybody? This is Superbrick501 and today I want to go over some data mined information that shows some possible new weapons and abilities that could be coming to New World sometime soon. Now these come from Reddit and I will have all these posts linked in the description if you want to check them out for yourself. And also just a disclaimer, anything that's data mined doesn't mean it's going to come to the game at any point or any point soon. Some stuff can just be leftover old ideas that were never taken out of the files. Some stuff could be months or longer away. Some stuff could be stuff that they want to add into the game but then get canceled later on. But with that being said, specifically with some of the data mined weapons, I think there's a pretty good chance that some of these will be coming to the game because they're just stuff that is surprising that's not already in the game. So first off, we have a data mined list of weapons in the game, and there is a good chunk of new weapons in this list. So first off, under magic, you have your life staff, you have your fire staff, and your ice gauntlet that are all in the game. Then you have a void gauntlet and then an angry earth staff. Now void gauntlet, we're going to go over more in this video because this is the only weapon that has pretty much all of its abilities and skill trees data mined as well. The other weapons either don't have those in the files yet or aren't at that point in development. And both these weapons seem really cool. The void weapon, like I said, we'll go over its abilities later. They seem really cool. And angry earth staff seems really cool as well. That seems like a staff that would be much more about control and manipulation of the battlefield. So I could see you being able to put up walls to block movement, AoE roots, or other abilities along those lines. Next, we have one-handed melee weapons, and some of these I think are probably going to be dual-wield weapons, but it's still going to be two one-handers. So we have the hatchet, which is already the game. We have a mace, which if I'm not mistaken was a weapon that was actually in the game. The game was first shown off when it was essentially a full loot PvP survival game where players built everything when the game was first shown off a few years ago. Then we have dagger, and some people have been saying they think there's a possibility that the dagger could be only one dagger like the hatchet is. I do think that would be quite weird. Most likely if they're going to add daggers to the game, it's going to be a dual wielded weapon. We have shield, we have sword, and then we have rapier. So the new things in this would be mace and dagger. That would be pretty cool. Not exactly certain what mace could be, but usually maces are more like blunt type stuff, probably some stuns, probably some armor breaks or debuffs, stuff like that. Then daggers most likely would be very quick hitting weapons, possibly have some sort of shadow step or movement ability like that. And then most likely we'll have poisons tied in, if I would have to guess what would be in a weapon like that. So next we have two-handed melee weapons. We have great axe, we have war club, we have war hammer, polearm, spear, and longsword. So we have a few new weapons. We have war club, which seems like it'd be a more crude weapon. Like the first thing I think of is like just a big like rounded piece of wood, almost like a medieval bat or something like that. So I'm not exactly certain what that would be. If I would wager a guess, I would think that would more be like towards the mace, mostly having stuns, blunt damage, stuff like that. Probably not many damage debuffs, but I'm not exactly certain with the war club. Then we have a polearm, which is similar-ish to a spear, except instead of jabbing attacks, the blade is on the side. So something like this would most likely be focused on cone AoE attacks in front of you. I'm not exactly certain how that would work because most of the melee weapons in New World kind of already work like that with light attacks, so I'm not exactly certain on a lot of stuff with that. And then we have longsword, which would just be the big two-handed sword. I'm not sure if that would also take the place of something like a great sword, or if sometime in the future you would also have something like, you'd have a long sword, you'd have a great sword, and have some differences in those. But a long sword is definitely something that there's a really good chance of going to be into the game sometime, and I would wager probably one of the sooner upcoming weapons, just because two-handed swords in any fantasy game like this are always kind of the main two-handed weapon, and you would have all the normal things you would think of with a two-handed sword, probably a little bit quicker than the warhammer and the axe, with more cleaving attacks, possibly some bleeds and stuff like that. Then we have the ranged weapons, which is bows, muskets, and then pistol, and it also says that has a crossbow variant instead of crossbow being another weapon. So I'm not exactly certain what this would mean. This may be something that's old or something that's not further along, because most likely if they're going to add pistols, they're not going to have some crossbow variant to it. That doesn't really make sense with how New World is. If it's a weapon, it's a weapon. You don't have like other variants sense to do the same things, because in that case you would just have like a sword as a variant of a hatchet or something like that. So it's either an old file or just maybe in the files a little bit weird, but I could definitely see both of these things being put in. Pistols, probably a one-hander pistol, then a crossbow. Most likely they would be adding like a two-handed crossbow. They could add, say, like a one-handed or two one-handed crossbows, but most likely it would be a one-handed pistol and then a big two-handed crossbow, and I could easily see both of those being in the game. Pistols being a much faster shooting variant of a musket, much quicker to reload, a lot more bullets, but with less damage. Then a big two-handed crossbow would be a much harder hitting and more accurate bow, essentially, but with a slower reload time. So the velocity would be quicker, it'd be easier to hit, and it would be a much more slow attacking, high damage weapon, where the bow can definitely be fired quite a bit quicker, but is harder to hit and doesn't have near as fast as a reload time as a crossbow would have. So that is all of the listed data mined weapons. I wanted to go over one of the weapons that not only has its name data mined, but it also has pretty much all of its abilities and skill trees data mined as well, and that is the Void Gauntlet. And like I said, I'll have these linked in the description, these posts on Reddit, if you want to come check them out yourself. And like I said, pretty much all of these skills are in this, so even all the passives or smaller skills, but I mainly want to go over the abilities for the Void Gauntlet instead of the other stuff that's usually just, you know, critical damage increase or basic stat increases like that. So first off, you have Void Blade. Summon a blade of void energy that converts your basic attacks to melee. Tap basic attack to perform a quick slash that deals weapon damage, or hold to perform a thrust that deals some amount of weapon damage. Both attacks inflict disintegrate on successful hits, dealing % damage per second and reducing damage absorption by some amount for some amount of seconds. So this first one actually seems really unique, and kind of reading through these and my opinion on how they've been creating newer weapons in New World, I think this could definitely be something that would come to the game, because like I've said in the past, the newer weapons in New World are much more unique and have much more unique abilities, flashy animations, and seem a bit more well built, such as the Ice Gauntlet. It has this big AoE, it has a summonable tower. A lot of the stuff in it seems more unique. Then we have the two-handed Great Axe, which has a big like vortex that pulls stuff in, has a lot of crowd control on your abilities, a lot of more unique abilities that seem a bit more fun to use than a lot of the other kind of basic skills that you get with a lot of the other weapons. And just with this first ability, this weapon seems really unique. It's a Void Gauntlet, so it'd be a ranged weapon, a ranged magic weapon, but this first ability changes it into a melee weapon, has a light and heavy attack, and it also applies debuffs, deal damage over time, and reduce damage absorption on the target. So already changing up the range and magic effect of the weapon and having a tree that essentially will turn you into a melee magic dealer. Then another ability is Punishing Chamber. Summon a circle of void energy at your feet that deals % weapon damage per second to enemies and grants empower to allies, increasing their damage by some amount and has an 8-second duration. So it's essentially you summon a big AoE that deals damage per second to enemies, and while your allies are standing in it, it buffs their damage. And there's no specific numbers in these, which makes sense. So usually wouldn't be in the files most of the time, specifically with stuff that's not in the game yet. There wouldn't be hammered out numbers to put on them. And this is a really cool ability, and I could definitely see this if this comes in the game with this ability. This is probably going to be able to use a lot in PvE like dungeons and a lot in big PvP battles. So say wars, this will probably be used on quite a bit. And then we have Petrifying Scream. Unleash a void infused scream, dealing % weapon damage and inflicting root to enemies 4 meters in front of you, disabling their movement. So then we pretty much have an AoE damage ability or a cone damage ability in front of you that also roots enemies. So adds a decent amount of CC. It's not hard CC, but it definitely ties into what this specific side of the tree would be doing. You're turning into a melee weapon. You have a AoE put on the ground so you could root somebody, proc your melee damage effect, plop your AoE on the ground, and then do tons of damage to that rooted target. And then for the ultimate for this tree, which would just be the ability at the bottom that you have to have a certain amount of points spent in that skill tree to be able to unlock it, I think it's 11, is a Void Aura. On successful ability hits, gain a stack of Void Essence. At 6 stacks, consume all stacks and gain a aura on yourself that heals friendly targets for a % of your weapon damage and deals % of your weapon damage per second to enemies within a certain duration around you. So again, a much more unique effect that also I think gives a lot more ability to be used correctly than a lot of the stuff in the game. So essentially you build up these stacks when using your abilities, then you proc a big AoE that heals allies and deals damage to enemies around you. So you could also choose to say not get another stack of this depending on how long they last, and wait for a good time to use your ability to get your last stack of this and proc this big AoE damage and healing. And I do really like how the abilities and stuff so far, at least on this side of the Void Gauntlet skill tree, is this hybrid playstyle of abilities where a lot of it's dealing damage, but then a lot of it is also helping your enemies. So kind of like a damage dealing healer. It almost reminds me of Moira from Overwatch. And then the next ability, and I'm assuming this would be on the other skill tree, we have Decaying Orb. Fire an unblockable orb that passes through enemies and inflicts disintegrate, dealing % weapon damage per second and reducing damage absorption by a certain %. At max range, it transforms into a healing orb and returns, healing friendlies for a % weapon damage per second. So again, this much more reminds me of Moira, kind of the same thing as Moira's orb in Overwatch, just does both off one orb. So essentially you throw out an orb that deals damage, puts disintegrate on enemies, which deals damage per second and reduces their damage absorption. Then when that orb goes to its max range, it turns into a healing orb and then comes back. Most likely it just comes back straight in a line to whatever position you're at now. So it's most likely tracked to you. And then any allies that it comes into contact with or heals in its area, it'll then heal them per second for some amount of healing. So like I said before, a lot of these abilities are probably going to be much more flashy, quite a bit more unique than just another ability that does some amount of damage and is a normal hit, which a lot of the early weapons in New World are pretty standard and boring in that way. Then we have Draining Tether. Fire a projectile that tethers you to an enemy, weakening it and empowering you by some amount. The tether ends if the target moves beyond 10 meters. So essentially you link yourself with a target, it weakens them and empowers you. I'm not exactly certain what this is because it doesn't really say in the files. This could either be it weakens their defenses, making them squishier and increasing your damage, or increasing your defenses from theirs, or maybe reducing the damage they deal, increasing the damage you deal. Not exactly certain, but again, a really cool ability that can be used really poorly if you're bad with it, or could be used and be very strong if it's someone that uses it that knows how to use it. Then we have Essence Rupture. Fire a projectile that inflicts Essence Rupture for some amount of seconds, healing anyone that hits that target for a % of the damage done. So again, even on this tree, you have this hybrid playstyle. So now this, you just fire a projectile that when it hits an enemy, it inflicts Essence Rupture, then anybody that hits that enemy heals themselves percentage of the damage they're dealing. This could be very good for dungeons on boss fights. It could be very good for smaller scale PvP, or it can even be pretty good for large scale PvP, especially wars where everyone's clumped up. It could possibly hit multiple targets, or if it can only hit one target, it can still be pretty good, because if you're all clumped up and you hit one target with this, that target's still going to be getting hit by a bunch of people, so you'll definitely be able to put out a good amount of healing on people. This is also going to be incredibly strong for solo play, especially for leveling and stuff like that, or just going and doing harder solo content. Then we have Void Conversion, the ultimate for this side. Gain a stack of Void Essence per successful ability hit. At a certain amount of stacks or more, your next successful heavy attack will instantly reset all of Void Gauntlet cooldowns and remove all stacks. So like I've been saying with all of these abilities, they're much more unique and require a lot more skill to use to its full potential. A lot of the abilities in New World, like I've been saying of the earlier weapons, are kind of just you hit with some extra damage, maybe you apply a bleed, maybe it does like some CC, but it's always just kind of a generic hit that looks almost exactly like a light or a heavy attack. And even on the ultimates, not even the abilities themselves with this Void weapon, they seem really unique. And this is incredibly strong. So if you hit a certain amount of stacks after hitting abilities, you then hit your next heavy attack and it resets all of your Void Gauntlet abilities. Now this is such a cool idea and ability or passive because you choose when to do this. Once you get to a certain amount of stacks, you then choose, depending on the duration, when you want to reset all of your abilities. So say if you got to that amount of stacks and you're like, oh, all of my abilities are already up, you could use all 3 of your abilities super quickly, then hit a heavy, resets all your abilities, and you use them again. So there's a good amount of skill that goes into just this ultimate. So that's pretty much all I want to go over with some new leaked weapons and abilities for one of those weapons for New World. So subscribe if you want to see more New World or other MMO videos. Leave a like if you liked the video. Leave a comment down below what you guys think about all of these leaked weapons and abilities. And thanks for watching.